Vladimir Komarov. In 1967, the Soviet Union was deeply locked in the space race, where every mission carried political meaning far beyond science. Prestige mattered just as much as progress, and being first often outweighed being careful. In that environment, one man was chosen to carry the weight of expectation, responsibility, and national pride. His name was Vladimir Komarov, a respected Soviet cosmonaut trusted with a critical mission. Komarov was not inexperienced. He was a veteran who fully understood the risks of spaceflight. He was trusted by his superiors, seen as reliable under pressure, and capable of handling difficult situations. But the spacecraft he was assigned to fly had serious unresolved problems. Engineers had raised concerns about critical systems, warning that the mission was unsafe. Those warnings were documented, discussed internally, and known within the program. Despite this, the launch schedule was not changed, and the mission moved forward. On April 23, 1967, Soyuz 1 lifted off, carrying Vladimir Komarov alone into orbit. Almost immediately after launch, multiple systems began to fail. One of the spacecraft's solar panels did not deploy, limiting power and control. Navigation systems malfunctioned, making it increasingly difficult to stabilize the spacecraft. Komarov was alone in orbit, managing a failing spacecraft without a backup crew. After assessing the situation, Mission Control made the decision to bring him back to Earth. On April 24, 1967, Soyuz 1 began its descent through Earth's atmosphere. During landing, the parachute system failed to deploy correctly. There was no chance to slow the spacecraft's descent. The capsule struck the ground at high speed, killing Vladimir Komarov instantly. He became the first human in history to die during an active spaceflight mission. His death was publicly acknowledged and could not be concealed. But it was more than a tragedy, it was a warning. A warning about the cost of ignoring risk, one the world would encounter again. Apollo 1. While the Soviet Union continued to push forward in the space race, the United States was racing just as urgently, determined not to fall behind. NASA was preparing for a historic step forward, its first crewed mission under the Apollo program. The mission carried a simple name, but enormous expectations. It was called Apollo 1. 3 astronauts were selected for the flight, each chosen for their experience and skill. Gus Grissom was a veteran astronaut, already known as one of NASA's most accomplished pilots. Ed Whitehead made history as the first American to walk in space and was respected for his discipline. Roger Chaffee was the youngest of the crew, preparing for what would have been his first space mission. On the day of the tragedy, the crew was not preparing for launch into space. They were conducting what was considered a routine ground test inside the spacecraft. The capsule was pressurized with pure oxygen, a standard procedure at the time. But pure oxygen created a highly dangerous environment where fire could spread instantly. Then, without warning, something went wrong inside the sealed cabin. A spark ignited within the capsule. Fueled by oxygen, fire spread faster than human reaction time. The crew attempted to escape, reacting as quickly as possible. But the hatch was not designed to be opened rapidly under pressure. Within minutes, the test had turned into a fatal accident. All 3 astronauts were dead. They lost their lives without ever leaving Earth. The moon mission was immediately halted. NASA launched a full investigation to understand what had gone wrong. The Apollo program would eventually continue, but not without change. Apollo 1 left a permanent mark on spaceflight history. Because space exploration had claimed lives before a mission had even begun. Soyuz 11. For years later, the Soviet Union reached another major milestone in its space program, pushing human presence even farther beyond Earth. This achievement was the creation of the world's first space station, designed to keep humans in orbit for extended periods. The station was called Salyut 1, and it represented a new chapter in long-duration spaceflight. 3 men were chosen to live and work aboard the station, carrying the responsibility of this historic mission. Georgy Dobrovolsky was the mission commander, leading the crew through an untested environment. Vladislav Volkov brought experience from previous space missions and played a key role in operations. Viktor Patsayev was responsible for scientific research, becoming the first space station engineer in history. Together, they spent more than 3 weeks in orbit, conducting experiments and proving that humans could live in space for extended periods. By every official measure, the mission was considered a success. On June 30, 1971, the crew began their return to Earth, expecting a routine descent. During preparations for re-entry, something went wrong inside the capsule. The spacecraft suddenly depressurized, allowing air to escape into space. There was no explosion to signal danger. There was no warning to alert the crew. When the capsule landed, it appeared undamaged from the outside. Recovery teams opened the hatch, expecting to greet the crew. Instead, they found all 3 astronauts dead. To this day, they remain the only humans confirmed to have died in space itself. Challenger. By the mid-1980s, spaceflight had begun to feel routine, almost familiar, as if the dangers had been left behind. Launches were no longer rare events. They were broadcast live, watched like scheduled programming. Classrooms across America gathered around television screens, treating spaceflight as a lesson, not a risk. January 28, 1986. It was an unusually cold morning at Cape Canaveral, with temperatures far lower than any previous shuttle launch. Some engineers were uneasy. They had concerns about how the cold could affect critical components. But the schedule held. The decision was made to proceed. Challenger lifted off, rising cleanly into a clear blue sky. For 73 seconds, everything appeared normal. Then, without warning, the shuttle broke apart high above the Earth. 7 astronauts were lost in an instant. The world went silent, watching the sky where Challenger had been moments before. At first, there was no immediate explanation for what had happened. The cause would take months of investigation to uncover. In the end, it came down to a simple component. A rubber O-ring seal failed. Cold temperatures had made the failure far worse than expected. Warnings about this risk had existed long before the launch, but they were not acted on in time. Challenger grounded the entire shuttle program, forcing NASA to stop and reflect. For the first time, millions of people witnessed the true cost of spaceflight in real time. Columbia disaster. 17 years after the Challenger disaster, human spaceflight resumed, carrying the belief that lessons had been learned and risks better understood. The mission was called Columbia, a familiar shuttle returning once again to orbit as part of NASA's routine operations. At launch, everything appeared normal, with no visible signs that anything was wrong. But the danger began immediately, during the very first moments of liftoff. A small piece of insulating foam struck the shuttle, causing damage that went unnoticed at the time. The damage was subtle, easy to dismiss, and difficult to fully understand while the mission was underway. As a result, it went uncorrected, remaining hidden as the mission continued. For 16 days, the crew worked in orbit, conducting experiments and completing their objectives as planned. They carried out their duties unaware of what awaited them upon return. On February 1, 2003, Columbia began its journey back to Earth. During re-entry, superheated air entered the damaged wing, penetrating the shuttle's structure. The spacecraft began to break apart high above the atmosphere. All 7 astronauts on board were killed, marking another tragic chapter in spaceflight history. Columbia marked the last time astronauts lost their lives during a space mission, a moment that brought an era of tragedy to a close. But it was not the last lesson space exploration would teach humanity. Each tragedy forced change, leaving behind hard-earned knowledge shaped by loss. Spacecraft were redesigned, with safety becoming a priority rather than an afterthought. Systems became stronger, built to withstand failures that once proved fatal. Procedures grew stricter, demanding caution where urgency had once dominated decisions. And with time came a deeper understanding of risk and the consequences of ignoring it. Astronauts were never chasing death or danger for its own sake. They were chasing discovery, driven by curiosity and the desire to push beyond known limits. And they believed the future that awaited humanity among the stars was worth the risk. And this is how the world's most famous astronauts died.